Today we are going to talk about Plato's ethics. We are also going to be covering his famous theory of forms. I myself study ancient Greek and did a lot of research. It's really fascinating. Would Plato be disappointed in our society today? We will find out in just a bit. Good day guys, this is Fast Philosophy and today we are going to talk about the ethics of the most famous philosopher in the history of mankind, Plato. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss anything and leave a like if you enjoyed. So let's just jump into it. First, let us talk about his life. Plato was a Greek philosopher from the 4th century BC and was one of the most influential people in Western philosophy. He was born in 427 BC in one of the wealthiest families in Athens. His family was heavily involved in politics. 2 of his uncles were even in one of the 30 tyrants. Normally, Plato should have gone into politics, like the rest of his family. However, one day when he was 20, he met Socrates. He became a student of Socrates and he played a very important role in his books. When he was a bit older, he went to southern Italy. There he met a lot of Pythagorean philosophers, like Archytas. 20 years later, he went to Sicily to convince Dionysius II to change his politics. This mission turned into a fiasco and didn't change his governing form. But something that Plato made, which did have an impact, was his school, the Academy. The Academy was Plato's school. He bought a garden just outside Athens and called it after a Greek hero, Academos. The Academy wasn't a strict school, as our schools now, but it was rather a community where you could discuss philosophical issues. Plato also didn't see himself as a teacher, but as a guide. He resided in his school until his death. Then his students, like Aristotle, continued the school 9 centuries later, until Emperor Justinianus tear the school down because he thought that the teachings didn't stroke with the Christian philosophy. Plato has a virtue-based happiness conception of ethics, which basically means that happiness is the highest achievable goal of moral thought and conduct. The virtues are the skills you need to get there. Almost everybody agrees that Plato's work can be divided into 3 parts: his early, his middle, and his late works. And they all differ in style, content, and language. In his early Socratic dialogues, he isn't interested in the conditions of a good life, but he examines very specific virtues. When he examines a virtue, he lets Socrates talk to an expert of that virtue. For example, when Plato wrote about the courage, he let Socrates speak to generals who fought in the Peloponnesian War. In these dialogues, Plato tried to search for definitions of those virtues. So, he let Socrates question the so-called experts, and at first, they would always be confident, but in the end, they had to admit that they were ignorant because they didn't know the definition of their virtue. Here, Socrates didn't try to humiliate the other person, but simply sought the right definition. In every definition, Socrates sought the flaws, and by exposing these flaws, Plato significantly contributed to the establishment of standards for definitions. This all raises the question if Plato himself knew these answers. He never gave the answers, maybe because he didn't have them, or maybe because he wanted his readers to think for themselves. We don't know. But the lesson you can learn from these short dialogues is that for a virtue, a single sentence definition will not do. Plato himself pleaded for the unity of virtues in one thing: wisdom. In Plato's book, Protagoras, Socrates gives proof that reason cannot be overcome by the passions. But even though Plato sees virtues as technical skills, he acknowledges that virtues also need some sort of emotional attitudes or desires. Plato's search for definitions also implies that the thing that you are defining has a stable nature, otherwise you couldn't give a definition. Now, maybe the most important part of Plato's early life works is his theory of forms. This theory says that there are timeless and unchangeable ideas or forms. These ideas or forms can be, for example, beauty. And Plato says that everything in the world is simply an imitation of those forms. Now, let's talk about his middle period. In his middle period, he wrote the Republic. And the Republic was a book where Plato described how the perfect state would look like. You can clearly see that Plato's way of thinking has changed, because now the audience of Socrates' conversations wanted definitions for certain virtues. In the Republic, he also talks a lot about justice and injustice. To discover the origin of justice and injustice, you can look at the workings of the perfect city-state, Plato says. So let's talk about that. Plato says that even though everybody has a lot of needs, no one is self-sufficient. That is why we troop together in cities and villages. Plato also pleads for economic efficiency. This is why he says that everybody has to do the task he is most fit to do. This is why Plato divides the population into three groups: the ruling class, mostly philosophers, the army, and the working class. The ruling class, he says, also should overlook the education. Plato says that the army or the guardians should be highly educated because they should be friendly against citizens, but fearful against their enemies. They should also know philosophy, as they are the philosophical watchdogs. For the final part, let's talk about his later life works. His later life work is less idealistic, but more strictly philosophical. You can barely speak of dialogues now, and his texts are far less elaborate. But he still poses very interesting questions like, what is knowledge? Or is knowledge simply seeing things, or is it seeing things with a justification? What do you think was the most interesting period of his life? Let us know down in the comment section. If you enjoyed, you should subscribe so you don't miss anything. Have a nice day, and I hope I see you in the next video.